Hello, everybody. Welcome to our new webinar series about the AI-powered startup. My name is Darren Ball. I work for Rocker. My background is in building tech startups and helping them to raise money. We worked in all sorts of different contexts, not just with solo founders, but as part of accelerators, venture builders, with corporate innovation teams, and venture studios. And all of this has been in the context of helping founders go from idea to their first round of funding. So it's really about that very early stage initial journey. And as part of that work, obviously, we've distilled a series of tools and frameworks and approaches which we have used to give startup founders ultra clarity about what problem they're trying to solve at each stage of the startup building journey. So that's something that we've refined over the last decade or so. And now what we're looking at is how we can use AI to power this process. All right. So today what we're going to focus on is the first stage of this process, what we call idea validation. But it's really just the first in a series in which we look at many different steps of this to help bring to life the way that we would approach this with AI, and also help you to think about, how you might approach the same problem. We'll start with a little bit of context to set the scene about the different stages of the startup building journey, what it is that we need to achieve in each stage, and the kind of tools and frameworks that we use in order to help us to answer those questions. Then we'll talk about the challenge we have with idea validation. What is it that we need to solve, and how might we use AI to do that? And then we'll actually go through a real example, using GPT with different prompts that we can experiment with to see what kind of output that we can get, ultimately for generating a new value proposition in response to an understanding of what the real problem is in the market. Then we'll look at what's next, what's coming next in the webinar series, what you can look forward to in terms of the other stages in this process that we're going to focus on. And then what we want to share with you is a sneak peek into something that we're working on right now that we're very excited to tell you about, and which you can be a part of as well. So when we look at the journey of an AI-powered startup, there are 6 steps that we've outlined here just to simplify how we can think about what it is that we need to do in order to unlock that next round of investment. The first thing, obviously, is that we need to validate our idea. And what we're doing there is we're solving what we understand to be a real problem in the market with a differentiated value proposition. Why this is important? Why do we bother validating ideas? Because most startups fail, as you know, because they do not solve a real problem. Right? And even when people have an idea, very rarely do they actually do the groundwork to make sure that they are differentiating themselves from the existing solutions in the market today. Right? But if we want to look for a way to enter the market, we need to understand not just what the table stakes are, but what it is that the existing solutions are not doing well. Right? So that we know what to focus on, not just in terms of what we build, but in terms of how we talk about our solution. Okay? So that's the first step. The second step is the plan for traction. How are we going to go from 0 to our first 100 users, and then how are we going to go from our first 100 to 1,000? Right? A lot of people think about this as a last thing, right? But the truth is that we need to have a plan for acquiring users so that we don't have a white elephant product, right? There's a lot of people who have been burned in the past pursuing an idea with, an enormous amount of enthusiasm, but without any groundwork to start to build an audience for that product, right? So that by the time the product's ready, you can already have people starting to use it as part of a closed beta or pilot that you might be running. A lot of people get to the stage where they're actually launching a product and they've got no one to use it. And not only that, but they realize that there's a lot wrong with the product design and the problems that they've tried to focus on solving and the way they've done it, right? You want to build a product together with your community. And having a plan for traction is a way that you can think through the different stages of that go-to-market journey, okay? The next thing is kind of the natural outgrowth of this is that we want to start to build the wait list right away. Yes, it's a lot easier to build products now. Yes, they might take days instead of weeks. But at the end of the day, we need to have people who can start to bring in to use the product in a controlled environment. So why not get started now? It does not make sense to start building anything until you've started to build a wait list. You don't need to build your whole list of 10,000 users or whatever it is before you start building anything. That's not what we're advocating at all. We're advocating the fact that when you build a wait list, it will help you to validate that the problem you're solving is a real one. It'll help you to validate that the value proposition that you've come up with resonates with your target audience, and it will help you to validate that the channels that you are using to go to market and acquire those users is working, right? Those are 3 big questions that any investor or any stakeholder is going to be looking at when you have a new startup product, right? And that's the value of a wait list in terms of indicators of momentum and reducing risk in your startup idea. Okay, so let's assume we validated the idea. We have a plan for traction for acquiring our first 100 and then 1,000 users, and we started to build this wait list, and we're starting to get indicators that we do have something that's solving a real problem in a compelling way, and our channels to market are working. Then what? So the next step is that we obviously want to look at building a product. And this is where AI has really completely changed everything. Even an MVP in the past could have taken weeks, possibly even months to build. Even just a working prototype with which you could use to help communicate your idea to some very early stage users. Now with the vibe coding tools are available, or the AI-based integrated developer environments that you can use, this thing that used to take months or weeks can take days, right? It doesn't mean that we should just jump in there and bang away at the keyboard. There is still a degree of structure that we want to bring to the table, even in a vibe coding environment, in order to get the best results. And anyone who's started to use Lovable or Base44 or any of these other tools will be familiar with the kind of challenges that you can have if you don't approach it in a structured way, and if you don't think in a deliberate way about the way that you are prompting the AI. So we'll talk in a later webinar about the ways that you can approach this, the way that you can approach your vibe coding in a more structured manner to get better results with the tools that you are using. What we're talking about here is creating an environment in which people can use an early version of the product, in which we are making the most of it to be able to track and measure the essential KPIs that will help us to tell a story with numbers to our investors and stakeholders. By which I mean this. Imagine that we're building our wait list, right? And by this time, we might have 500 or 1,000 users who we have on that list. We can start to invite small cohorts of users into our pilot, perhaps 10, 15, 20, 25 users, depending also whether we're in a B2B or B2C context. And what we can do with that small cohort is make sure, number one, that we're getting the qualitative feedback that we need. Number two, make sure that we're getting the quantitative feedback that we need. And as a result of those deeper and more insightful conversations, that we're understanding the impactful changes that we can make to improve the KPIs that we are measuring, and we are making those changes, right? So we understand the problems worth solving and the impactful changes we can make so that we can be improving our funnel in the first place, which is our KPIs like our activation, our onboarding, our engagement, our retention, etc. And then also things that can help us to give us an indication of whether this product is really sticky. So the product market fit score, NPS score, and of course, as I mentioned, the retention. Whichever way it makes sense to define that. Usually we're also looking at some North Star metric, which is giving us a real focus for the team to understand, but from a product development standpoint and a business standpoint. And that's all of those things are a key part of the story that you want to be able to tell in the next stage, which is about unlocking investment. So in this next stage, the key is really about creating a compelling narrative with traction to unlock that next round of investment. Even if you're working internally in a corporate innovation environment, you still have stakeholders. You still have to unlock the next round of funding from your sponsor, whoever that may be. So this is not just relevant to founders who are working in an outside environment, who are looking for angel investors or otherwise in order to help them get to the next stage. This is for us unlocking the resources we need internally within the business, which may even be access to other people who can be a part of our team and help take you to the next stage. So now we've got the context, right? We need to validate the idea. We need a plan for traction. We need to build the wait list, or at least start to build the wait list, also as an indicator that we're on the right track. Then we can invest some time in building the product so that we can run a pilot to get the story, to get the information that we need that will allow us to tell a story with numbers and create that compelling narrative with traction. Okay? So that's the next stage. This applies, again, whether you're working as a solo founder, as part of Accelerator, or even as part of a corporate innovation team. The rules of the game are the same. Okay? Now let's look at the next part of this. So we understand the context. Now let's look at the kind of things, the activities, the tasks that we need to undertake at each stage, and the kind of frameworks that we have in place that give us ultra clarity each stage. When we're talking about validating the idea, it is critical to understand who you're building it for, what it is they want to achieve, and how they struggle to do that today. Right? That is going to give you insight so that you can enter the market with a value proposition that is differentiated from the competition. Then we're going to validate that, right? You need a plan for traction. And what do we mean by that? You need to know how you're going to go to market. At a very basic level, you can look at a B2C or a B2B playbook, and you can understand, therefore, what your acquisition plan is going to be, what tactics and tools that you're going to need in order to execute that. And we need to think about that ahead of time, because the next step, the next thing that we want to do is start building that wait list, right? And starting to build that wait list involves, number one, defining your brand identity and positioning, building that landing page, and then executing on the strategy that you defined, right? We want to get to our first 100 users. If we expect a 10% conversion rate from that waiting list, we need to acquire a waiting list of 1,000 users over the course of the next few weeks while we build our product and get ready to run the pilot. Okay, so let's imagine we're at the next stage now. We're building that product. How do we do that? Well, today, obviously, we have access to various vibe coding platforms, Base 44, Lovable, V0, etc. And there's also many different AI-powered IDEs which are popping up, which allow a more sophisticated approach, a much more structured approach for more complex products. So very quickly, we're going to get into the position where we're going to be running our pilot. And for that pilot, there are essential kind of set of workflows that you need to keep in mind and that we need to prepare for, right? We're going to have to make sure that we're onboarding users properly. We're going to have to make sure that we have the tools and channels in place to provide the essential user support that may be needed. We need to make sure that we have instrumented our product to get the feedback that we need, and that we are running those calls, those surveys, whatever it is, to get the qualitative feedback that together will allow us to identify those problems worth solving and make those impactful changes so that we can iterate that pilot, with the goal being to improve those KPIs and demonstrate the momentum we have so that we can unlock this next round of investment, which is the next stage. What are we doing at that stage? There's two kind of essential elements here. The first is what we call the now, next, future. And what this does, it allows us to put the product that we're building right now in the context of where we're expecting it to go in the future. What makes this a big opportunity worth pursuing? Why should the company be focused on this? Or why are you focused on this, and why should an investor care, right? So we've got our vision of the future, and we have a credible plan to get there in which we can demonstrate what we have done so far to get traction, right? We need to be able to show that there is momentum in the business. That's why we build the proof and promise. The proof and promise basically articulates to an investor, number one, this is the proof of traction that we have to date. This is what we've been able to do or achieve with the resources we have already. But here's what we're going to do with the next round of funding that we're raising now. This is our next milestone, which is going to create a step change in equity value for this business. And we want you to get in before that. This is how much it's going to cost us to get there. Would you like to invest in this business? We can wrap them up into a 90-second pitch. That's usually what you need to kind of open the door, in an initial email or call, and put that into a one-pager. Remember, we're not trying to have the whole conversation in a little deck that we send over. We just want to win that first 20-minute conversation so that we can meet them. They can get the opportunity to meet our team. They can get a better understanding of what we're building, the traction we have, and where we're going, and they can make a decision about whether they want to have the next conversation. That's all that's happening at that stage. But that is an essential part of the journey to unlock that next round of investment that's going to come. Okay, so that's the big picture in terms of specifically what do we need to do at each stage? What are the tasks? What would we need to task an AI agent to undertake in order to help to progress us through this journey? Now, the context for today is that we're going to be focused on this first stage, which is about validating the idea. And as I described before, what that means in terms of the questions that we actually ask is, who is the target audience for this product? Okay, how would we describe them? And I'll walk you through how we do that in a moment. The next question is what they're trying to achieve. Every business needs to understand what it is that their target audience is trying to achieve, because that is what gives you the clarity and focus about what you're trying to build. Okay, and also helps you to understand what is the process that my customer is going through that I need to understand in order to know what it is that they struggle with today, so that I can look comprehensively and systematically at that process to identify what the pain points are, which I can translate then afterwards into a roadmap for product development, and I can use to help me define a compelling value proposition that will be differentiated in the market. Okay. Then what we need to do is we need to take that and we need to see how does it actually score with users. Okay, and we use a method called the test wall to do that, and I'll walk you through a little bit more about that later. Okay, so let's start, shall we? Let's go through a real example and let's see how we would do this using AI tools to sort of do a sketch version of this journey. So the first step is, who is this target audience? And if you remember, if we're talking about a B2B audience, obviously we're looking to define, what's the industry, what's the role. If we're talking about a B2C product, then what's important is looking at some relevant defining characteristic, okay? Usually this will mean their life stage or some common attribute that they share with other people who are also trying to get this job done. That's the key thing. It's not about demographic characteristics at all. Why? Because there could be two people with radically different demographics who still both want to get the same job done, okay? For example, in this case, we're going to be focused on people who have come from overseas and are working in a new country and they're sending money back home, right? Migrant workers. You could have a migrant worker who was from country X and country Y. You could have one that was 24 years old and one that was 50 years old. You could have one who was single. You could have one with a family. The point is, at the end of the day, they're working overseas and they're sending money back home to their family. Okay? So let's look at how we do this in ChatGPT. Now, the approach that I usually take when I'm thinking about the who is one of three things. You can either define, refine, or start with a competitor website. Now, when I am defining, it's as simple as what we just described before, right? If you're looking at B2B, then you want to describe their job title, their role, or some common identifying attribute of the end user. So examples of that might be that, a sales development representative selling software as a service to enterprise businesses, or it might be a site manager working on a multifamily residential construction site. Things, you can see there's the industry, the job title, and maybe some clarifying aspect of that. So that we can better understand the context in which they're working. If we're talking about B2C, then what you need to think about is, as I described earlier, the life stage or any other defining attribute that will bring them together. So it could be an amateur sailing enthusiast. It could be millennials trying to escape the 9-to-5. It could be indie creators. It could be migrant workers, etc., etc. Okay? So these are just ways in which we can identify who it is that is trying to get the job done. So that's how I might, if I was defining it just kind of, on a piece of paper, those are the things that I'd be thinking about in order to get some clarity about who that person is. And then if we were looking at a competitor website, what I would do is I would put a prompt like this into GPT. So I would tell it to look at a specific website, which would be an existing competitor of whatever startup that I was working with. And I would ask it to tell me who the job, executor, and beneficiary are in ODI terms for this business specifically. All right, let's see. Okay, so here we've got a definition. So it's people who would be holding USDC. You could broaden this out and you could say, okay, maybe it's crypto asset holders generally, or it could be crypto asset holders with a large portfolio of USDC. It would depend on the context of your specific startup. But basically looking at this website for this competitor allows you to think about who this is, right? You could then talk about, in general terms, either crypto asset holder or crypto investor user. Easy. Okay, so now we have the who. Let's talk about the outcome. So the outcome is the thing that our target audience is trying to achieve. Okay, so let's go again with ChatGPT and let's ask it for some help. So we talked about the migrant working case, right? We're going to use that. And we're going to ask ChatGPT to help us define specifically the outcome in these outcome-driven innovation terms. And I'm using outcome-driven innovation because it is a very precise and succinct language for clarifying exactly who you're building it for, exactly what the outcome is, and later, as you'll see, the way that people actually struggle to get that job done today. Okay, so I'm going to describe myself as a migrant worker. So remember the previous step that we talked about before I went through that other example about using the website. We had defined our target audience as a migrant worker, okay? Now, what we're asking GPT here is to help us with the core functional job in these terms, which describes, and this is what I put in here, the need to save money for personal emergencies and the event my family needs the money. My family overseas or family back home needs the money. And then what I've asked it to do is just to make sure that it's doing it in the specific way that ODI recommends. So let's see what GPT comes back with. All right, so we have an outcome here, which is to accumulate savings for emergencies. Okay, that is a good job definition in ODI terms. There may be other ways that we could word this, which has come up with here. What I would do if I had something like this is that you could reach out to 3 to 5 people in the target audience, and you could just describe each one of these sentences to them, and see which one resonates most to them. Which one of these would they consider important? Which one of these would they consider relevant to their own personal goals and outcomes? Which one of these do they wake up in the morning and think about? So let's just imagine that it's accumulate savings for emergencies. So now we've got a who, which is a migrant worker, and we've got an outcome, which is to accumulate savings for emergencies. Now let's think about the next stage in this process. The next stage in this process is to think about whether there's a real problem to solve here. So there's 2 steps that you want to go through when you do this. The first is that you want to get it to build you a job map, which is the process that a user actually goes through when they're trying to achieve the outcome that we just described together. And the next stage is to get GPT to identify what are the unmet needs in that job map. How do people actually struggle today to get that job done based on the tools and existing solutions that are already available? So let's take the next step here with GPT. We've got this. I'm going to say, can you create the full job with all the needs, right? For the job of accumulate savings for emergencies for migrant worker, who is our job beneficiary. Okay, now you notice something different here, that I've switched a little bit away from ODI and I've talked about using Thrive. Just in my experience using jobs to be done for many years, I personally find the Thrive methodology less cumbersome to work with and more direct in terms of describing the needs. So again, what's very helpful is that ChatGPT has already been trained on this methodology already. And so I'm just using this as a shortcut in order to generate a job map in the way that I prefer. Okay, so that's all I'm doing here. Okay, so what it's started to do is start to build a universal job map for this job of accumulating savings for emergencies for a migrant worker supporting themselves and their family back home. Okay, perfect. So it's defining each of these steps as well as the needs that are a part of each one of these. And what we're going to understand next when this is done is we're going to try and understand which of these, and there'll be several, are unmet needs in the market today. Okay, you can still generating this. This usually takes many hours of desk research and many hours of interviews with people that we would consider masters, i.e. people who are very effective and successful in getting this job done today. People who are knowledgeable and experienced, perhaps they've been a migrant worker for many years, and they already know the different steps that you have to follow and the actions and decisions that you need to undertake at each one of those steps. Obviously, we're approximating that with ChatGPT, but if you're just trying to do a cursory validation as a first step, you can certainly do it this way. All right, so now we enter the end of the job map here. Obviously, what I would do is I would sanity check this to some extent. I'm not going to do it on the webinar here, but I would just sanity check this, that it makes sense to me, and then I would proceed to ask it to do the second stage, which is that I want it to tell me what are the unmet needs. Okay, so let's use our next prompt. So what I'm telling it to do here is basically to prioritize the unmet needs that appear in this job. To do that, they need to identify where the pain points are most acute within the job map. And I've asked it to do that using the criteria that Thrive advocates, which is looking at speed, accuracy, and looking at how often this particular decision or action needs to be done, and how much effort it requires from the user to do that today with the current tools and solutions that are available to them. Okay, so let's see what it does with this. Now, just as it generates this output, I mean, what I find very helpful is that it helps to profile what it is about being a migrant worker that makes this job difficult. They do have a regular income. They have family obligations back home. Many a time that is the reason they go overseas, to be able to earn a better income to support their family. In many cases, they're actually excluded from the financial systems in the countries in which they're working in, because it can be difficult for them to open accounts, etc. And there's always challenges getting money back home, especially during emergencies. And because they're excluded, they usually have a tough time getting access to credit and social safety nets. This all checks out, right? Makes sense. So let's look at what is prioritized here, and let's get a sense of what GPT, based on the research that's done, considers to be difficult and therefore a priority for us to address with our value proposition. Okay, so I'm just scrolling through these now to get a sense of what it's saying. We've got a few in the define step. I'm looking at the locate step. Yeah, but this is good. It's true. They got to manage these two competing priorities. This is interesting. Dual access systems for emergency family withdrawals. Yep, usually they're doing this. That's pretty hard to get partial remittances back and ensure they don't get used in the meantime. Quick retrieval is always difficult. Okay, so it's looked at overall, and then it's identified these areas, these most urgent needs that we want to focus on in terms of our problem solving with a new value proposition. So the next stage we want to look at is we want to generate ideas for our value proposition, right? This is a co-pilot. Think about it as a co-pilot or an aide helping you to brainstorm relevant ideas that solve known problems for migrant workers who are trying to get this job done of accumulating savings. Okay, so let's go back to GPT and let's prompt it with the next stage here. So this is just a prompt that I've been experimenting with, but that I found works quite well, which is asking GPT to turn these urgent unmet needs, that's what it's called it up here, into opportunity areas for innovation, right? We're trying to get it to kind of thematically look at these problems and think about the way that it might solve them. So that's what I've instructed it to do here. And what I've instructed it to do as well is to describe how each one of the ideas that it generates addresses their customer need and does it faster, more accurately than existing solutions, right? And the key, according to the Thrive methodology, is that we want these new solutions that it generates to be able to reduce the customer effort that is required to solve that particular action or decision. Okay, so let's hit it, see what we get. All right, so this is doing a job now of brainstorming these different ideas for us, and we'll see what it's come up with. Okay, first case, this smart emergency fund calculator. Okay, so this is helping us with our savings targets. Fine. Not particularly exciting, but fine. Now this is starting to get interesting. So we're talking now about a savings product that works across currencies and borders. So I'm assuming it's one account. It's sort of like a bilocated account. This is getting to the heart of what we saw as the problems with the unmet needs. We've got some auto saving ideas here. So automating our savings with different rules because we have such a regular income. When does it make sense to save? When can we afford to save and when can't we afford to save? So that when we are in a position when we can, it does it automatically. That, I think, is a good complement to some of the things that we saw up here, right? So we have a cross-border account. We're auto-saving, and we're doing it in an adaptive way. Okay, so you're starting to see how the overall value proposition can take shape just based on the brainstormed ideas that we got here. Then, here's a key. So we've got instant withdrawals, right? You can access the funds in our account from another country according to who they are and perhaps even what it might be for. And this adds another level of protection, I guess, for the person who is actually saving the money to ensure that it's being used for the right purposes. Now, this number 7 is interesting because a lot of people don't have access to a bank account, and so whatever tool that we might be providing them with for money transfer, especially if that includes a wallet, we need to have some way for them to get cash into that account. So we might need a network of partners, perhaps a post office or convenience stores that would allow us to do that. And this is advocating for a very simple way using QR codes to do that. This is great. Okay. Now, this is getting to the heart of what happens when there is actually an emergency. We can imagine a solution where there is one-click disbursement, right? This might even be initiated by the family member themselves. So in case it's in the middle of the night or the person who's saved can't do it immediately themselves, you've got these whitelisted recipients who can instantly trigger a withdrawal from this bilocated account into their own, for themselves, that they can withdraw at some local location or into their own local bank account. So this is very good, okay? And then you got the saving dashboard and a couple other ideas here. But I think you can already see that there's a list of very credible ideas here that we have generated, which we can start to shape together into an overall value proposition that makes sense. There's probably further prompts that we could easily develop and experiment with here to allow us to craft the entirety of this value proposition with the different pieces of this puzzle that we think make sense to us, right? So there are some that I called out there that I thought were relevant and that I would start to piece together, which I think, just based on my sort of product intuition, if you want to call it that, would make sense for this particular target audience and use case. So that is bringing us to the point at which we started generating ideas. And you can see the potential for taking this further, even at each stage going deeper, but now at this end of the process, getting to a point where we can start to craft the value proposition as a whole. And the next step that we would take after this, by the way, is to validate that value proposition. And the key with that, I think, is to still go talk to real users, because you do want to be talking to your target audience. And what that means for us is something called a test wall. And basically what you do in that test wall is that, number one, you validate the unmet needs that ChatGPT generated were ones that resonate with your target audience. Scale of 1 to 5, something like that, very simple. The next thing that we want to do is we want to validate the appeal of the value proposition that we've generated as a result of the output from ChatGPT. And there we're looking for an appeal score, scale of 1 to 10, again, very simple, just indicative, directional, helping us understand whether this is an 8, a 9, or 10, or less than that. And if it's less than that, to try and understand why. Is it a communication problem? Is it a problem with the way that the feature works? Is it missing something that would be essential in order to make it relevant, etc.? So as a result of that test wall, we get an understanding of, number one, was the problem real that ChatGPT generated? And number two, do we have a value proposition that we can pursue further in order to continue to develop this product idea to the next stage? So I hope that's given you a little bit of insight about how you can use ChatGPT in specific prompts that we've been experimenting with to help accelerate the idea validation process and the idea generation process even when we're coming up with new value propositions for the new startups that we're working with, either as part of accelerators, venture builders, corporate innovation teams, or solo founders. The next stage, the next thing we're going to look at is developing a plan for traction. Looking at the different playbooks that we can develop for B2B and B2C and how that breaks down into a robust acquisition plan and the different tools and tactics that you can use to actually progress that forward and build your waiting list. So stay tuned for next time. I do want to give you a sneak peek, though, into something that we're working on right now, which I think is extremely exciting. And that is something that we call Rocker X. So today, obviously, we've looked at the way that we can use AI to support the first stage at least of this innovation process, and more broadly, how we can look at the different tasks and agents that we would need to build in order to support the entirety of the process. And while there are many tools available, we know that from experience, of course, that the real challenge is not simply like accessing this technology, right? It's how to use it effectively. It's in the different prompts and the process that you can follow, and making sure that you have the right structure and you keep and you take advantage of the different frameworks that have been developed in order to provide you with the guardrails that will get you to a point that is successful. So that's why we want to close today's session with a special invitation. And at Rocker, as you know, we spent many years working alongside innovation leaders, helping them validate ideas, to scale products, to navigate complexity. And we're now turning that experience, combined with our unique methodology and our AI capabilities, into a new solution designed specifically for innovation teams. This is like your innovation co-pilot, right? So what we are looking at here is something that can help you to manage multiple innovation products simultaneously and to collaborate with your team in a structured and efficient way. It can help you to accelerate each stage of the innovation journey using AI, and it can help you to maintain full control throughout the process so that you are following a structured process rather than randomly exploring what this new idea might mean. This is a proven way that we have used and developed over many years in order to get us to a point where we can successfully raise the next round of funding because we have created something that is investable. We are currently in an early stage of development with this, but we want to build it together with innovation leaders like you. So if you are interested in being an early adopter of this product and helping to shape its development, we invite you to register using our interest form. You can find it at this QR code here. And those who register will receive exclusive early access to this beta version. They will help us to influence some of the product features and the way that we manifest those, and of course benefit from being a part of this early adopter community to accelerate your innovation program as soon as possible. And with that, thank you very much for your time today, and I'm available for any questions that you want to ask.